So I don't have a lot of room in the garage, and I decided that the next step that I need to do is start cutting out and shaping the keel sections, because these are also going to be just as long as the hull sides. So I have 2 sheets of 6mm marine plywood, and I have marked out 14 inches from here to this line and another 14 inches over to here, and then the rest of this I'll use whatever I use of it. So there's no point in cutting another 14 inches because I might get a little bit more out of it, especially where the keel comes to a point. So I'm going to leave this section full size, and after I cut these out, I'm going to join them together into long, narrower strips. So not the big wide sections like the hull sides, but these are going to be long, narrow strips that will be joined together to form the bottom of the keels. So I have it clamped together so that I can cut both boards at the same time, and I put a couple boards underneath it so that it will give me room to cut it out with the circular saw. The pieces are all cut out. I have two 14-inch wide pieces here. They're 8 feet long, and there are two more 14-inch wide pieces here. And over here are the remaining pieces that are a little bit wider, also 8 feet long, and I marked a line here about 4 inches away from the edge, and a similar line on that one, and that is going to be for the template to lay on here and to start cutting these out to be able to join these pieces together. And what I'm thinking is that these wider pieces here will be the part where it comes to a point at the tip, and that way I can save as much on the side as possible. I don't know if I'll be able to use it for anything later or not, but might as well. The two hull sides, I have both of them now standing up on their flat edge off to the side to make room to put the or to join the keel side, the keel bottoms down here. I have the template clamped on to the end of this piece of plywood. I use the square here to just make sure that it's at least mostly square. I also lined up with the mark that I had there, and I don't know if you can see it or not. It's also lined up with the pencil mark down inside here and on this side. But the main thing is that it's square here and along this edge as much as possible, and getting ready to cut out the puzzle piece joints. The first piece is cut out, and I wanted to show you real quick the arrangement that I have here. There's of course the template that's mounted on top of the wood that I want to cut, and you can see the wood that was cut sticks out a little bit from the edge of the template. That's because of the guide bushing. And underneath of that is a piece of wood that's sacrificial wood. So I've got the bit set on the router to go a little bit deeper. So it means it cuts a little bit into this piece of sacrificial wood. Now, the clamps will actually, the bottom of the clamp goes underneath the wood here, so it actually lifts this up a little bit. So that's why I put this piece of wood underneath the sacrificial piece, just to give a firm base for the router to make sure that I can push down on and get a good cut. All right, now I just need to cut out all the other pieces. One other thing to consider is this is the first piece that I cut out for the keel bottom, and this is the second one. And I wanted to show you that I always start out the template on this side up against this edge. It might, you might want to think, well, why can't we just cut both of these out, put both of these boards side by side, because the template extends the full width. And it'll make it much harder to line up this template with the next board on the other half of the template if we don't have a edge to go by. So it might seem like a little extra work and a little waste of effort, but it'll make lining up the next pieces much easier. Now, the other thing is these clamps. I mentioned earlier that they lifted up a little bit, and I really like these micro jig clamps because the amount that is lifted up back here is very small. If you compare that with the normal clamp, I mean, there's, you know, a couple inches worth of, grip on the other side of that, versus these micro clamps. It's just the metal just kind of bends around, so it's very thin. All right, the first joint on each hull bottom is done and dry fit, and they join together quite nice. I probably didn't need to route out all of this. If I had thought about it, I could have just stopped right about here, but that's okay. It doesn't hurt anything, and yeah, so I'll just continue on. The other thing is that there's a bit of a gap in here, and that's okay also, because I made these 14 inches wide here, but I really only need about 13 inches. So the final cut will trim this off anyway. So all right, so on to 2 more sets of joints, and we'll have the full length of the keel bottoms jointed up. I'm ready to mark out the lines for the keel, and so I have my twine here that I'll stretch tight to be able to mark the center line. And the total width of the narrow section of this keel is right about 14 inches, or about 355 millimeters. The original plans called for a width of about 260 millimeters, which is just over 10 inches, about 10 1/4 inches. And because I'm making the boat a little longer than the plans, I also want to make the width of the hulls a little wider to maintain the same ratio of the overall of the beam, not the overall beam, but the beam of each hull, or in other words, the width of each hull compared to the length of the hull. So with the extension that I'm making, I need to bring this out to about, I'm thinking around 340 millimeters, which will probably be just over 13 inches. So we're taking the width from an increase of about 3 inches. So that's one difference that I'm making. The other thing, the plans call for this to be exactly, on the plans it's 5.2 meters long, but the bottom of the keel is actually curved. So what I did is I took my tape measure and I measured the actual curve of the bottom of the hull side to make sure that this keel bottom here is long enough to fit that. And I actually made it a little longer so that I'll be able to cut this off. So yeah, so that's the plan. I'm going to get this drawn out. I'm going to start with the center line and make the markings from there. One side will be mostly straight and the other side will be mostly curved. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's about all for the markings from now. I'll come back when I have all that marked out. To get the front curve, I just hold this batten down and I clamp it down at one end, and I just make a gradual curve and then draw that line right here so that it makes a gradual curve up to the tip. Now the plans call for the bow of this piece, or the front end here, to come to a point, and I'm going to leave a little bit of room for putting a little bit of wood at the front tip of this, so I'm not pulling this right up to a point. I'm going to bring this up until it's about 2 inches across. So the other edge will come to this point right here, and then this curve comes to this. So we've got about a 2-inch tip here. And that way I can put a piece of wood at the front there to bring that up to a point and make sure it's nice and nice and sturdy. Both sides of the keel bottoms are now cut out. I have both halves, or both sides I should say, clamped together so that I could cut them out at the same time. And this is going to be the outside because it's straight all along here until it gets to the bow when it curves in. But this side is the inside because right here at the back it has a slight curve coming in here at the back. It's hard to see on the camera because it's a very small curve, but it starts from about here and it curves in maybe like 20 millimeters is about all that it curves in. And if we come up here to the front, this is straight here all along here until it gets to about here and it starts curving in. And again, this is the outside here, and it has a more gradual curve. This is the inside. It has a slightly sharper curve, not really sharp, just a little bit more of a curve to the inside. And when I was cutting these off, the cutoff from this side is over here, so you can see that is this piece right here. Now this is going to be used later to make a like a curved raised platform for the hull sides to sit on so that they'll be able to match the curve of this keel bottom here. The piece here, the cutoff piece here, is really just scrap, and I made this out of the wider section. I mentioned earlier I wanted to use the wider section for the pointy end for the bow because I can get more width out of this here. So we've got a nice piece. Now, I don't know if I'll be able to use this or not, but this is, you know, too good of wood to just throw away. So, all right, so that is the keel bottoms, and I'm going to need to take these apart and work on them separately now. Mount some type of platform to raise it up. I raised it up a little bit here just so that I could saw these out, but I'm going to raise this up so that I can start planking it and put a little bit of a curve to it ahead of time, even on the planking. One thing I wanted to mention that I didn't mention last time is you want to be careful when you're spreading the epoxy not to overwork it, because what will happen is the epoxy will start turning a milky color, and that's what it does when it starts filling up with air bubbles. So for what we're doing here, it's probably not that critical because this is all going to be sanded away anyway, but it is something to keep in mind, especially if you're working on your final finishes. So just make sure that you spread the epoxy around and not overwork it, and you should be fine. I have one coat of epoxy on both of the keels, and they are curing, and after they finish curing, I'm going to let this cure for at least a day and then give it a quick sand and to raise it, basically just to remove any of the wood fibers that stick up after the first coat of epoxy. And then I'll put a second coat of epoxy. Now this is the inside surface of the keels, and I had wanted to get a little further this week, but I think this will be enough for this video, and we'll continue next week. I need to get another coat of epoxy on the keels, and then flip them over and start putting some extra wood on it. I'm going to put some of this cedar, western red cedar that I've prepared earlier, and get that on the bottom, and that will be in next week's video, hopefully. All right, bye.